Turning to politics and fresh off what can only be described as a nationwide rebuke of the lies and conspiracies that have come to define Trumpism, with the defeat of several of his most high-profile hand-picked candidates. A group that includes a former TV anchor, a celebrity doctor, and a former football star, a member of the far-right Oath Keepers, all united in their zeal to embrace Trump's conspiracy theories and rhetoric that all too often sounds a whole lot like the greenlighting and acceptance of an era of political violence. The disgraced ex-president, with an established track record of electoral defeat, is widely expected on the heels of that to announce another bid for the White House tonight. It will be Trump's third presidential run. It is at this point uninteresting as a political story, in my opinion, but it is hugely important to our domestic and national security. The ex-president is under criminal scrutiny in multiple jurisdictions. One of those probes, the investigation into his handling of classified documents, has major national security implications. He's also a candidate who is tied to an ongoing domestic violent extremist threat in America, whose lies and conspiracies about the 2020 election led to the worst attack on the United States Capitol in centuries. The targets of Trump's smears and verbal attacks can become targets for actual violence. Look no further than the attack on Paul Pelosi, the husband of Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It was carried out by an adherent of conspiracy theories involving crazy things, but also racist things. Back in 2020, Trump's own FBI director told Congress under oath that white supremacists make up the biggest domestic terror threat.
What I can tell you is that within the domestic terrorism bucket category as a whole, racially motivated violent extremism is, I think, the biggest bucket within that larger group. And within the racially motivated violent extremist bucket, people ascribing to some kind of white supremacist type ideology is certainly the biggest chunk of that.
The biggest chunk of that. Playing a critical role in fomenting far right-wing extremism was Donald Trump, whose defense of white supremacists and peddling of white supremacist rhetoric is a hallmark of his political career ever since he announced his first run for the Republican nomination in 2015.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. They put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem.
Oh, but it is. Joining us now, Jonathan Karl, ABC News chief Washington correspondent, the author of Betrayal, the final act of the Trump show. It is now out in paperback. Also joining us, Lexie McCammon, Axios political reporter and an MSNBC contributor. And Frank Figliuzzi is here, former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence, now an MSNBC national security analyst. John Karl, I start with you. And again, I think here we have covered Donald Trump really for the better part of more than 2 years, about 3.5 years, as a threat, as someone who is happy and willing to stoke violence. Your book is the definitive body of reporting on how that came to pass. What are you watching for, not just in Trump, but in the country, if he announces another bid to run for office again?
Well, I'm watching for the reaction of the Republican Party to this, Nicole. Donald Trump left office on January 20th of 2021, a pariah. He left in disgrace. He would face his second impeachment trial, have 7 Republican senators vote to convict him. But even those who didn't talk about him as a, somebody that was a danger to the country. But the calculation almost seemed to be, well, he's gone now. Why impeach an ex-president? We're not going to have to worry about him anymore. And now to see him coming and launching, or apparently launching, yet another presidential campaign, and it being taken seriously by people in positions of authority. I mean, you saw Elise Stefanik, a member of the Republican leadership in the House, come out even before the announcement and endorse his candidacy. And you see that he has support among a significant segment of the electorate of the Republic. I mean, it's not what it was, but it's big. It's depending on the polls you're looking at. He is the front runner for a Republican presidential nomination, even after all of that. So I am looking to how do the people in his own party respond to this.
Jon Karl, let me show you what Liz Cheney, who was once in his own party, now she's a bit of a kingmaker in the other party in these midterms. Let me show you what she had to say about tonight.
This is certainly not the rollout I'm sure Donald Trump wanted for his announcement tonight. But, you know, it's also not the first time he's been totally detached from reality. Mm-hmm. I think, though, it's also really important for people to look at what's happening and what he's doing, not just through a political lens, but through the basic facts of his total lack of fitness for office. He's unstable. The January 6th committee has laid out very clearly his direct and personal involvement in every aspect of the plan to overturn the last election. He's, you know, someone who, knowing that the mob was armed, sent them to march on the Capitol to try to stop the count of electoral votes. And then while that bloody battle was underway at the Capitol, despite everyone around him pleading with him to tell the mob to stop and go home, he wouldn't do it. He sat and watched it on television. So there's no question that he's unfit for office, and I feel confident that he will never be president again.
Jon Karl, that is not just a political indictment from Liz Cheney. It sounds like what could become the text of a criminal referral. Is that afoot by the January 6th Select Committee?
I mean, it sure seems that Liz Cheney is telegraphing that, and it sure seems to be the thrust of what she has tried to do from, as you and I spoke, when this committee first started holding its hearings. She was talking in terms that seemed to prepare for a criminal referral, and those close to Donald Trump clearly fear it, and it's not just what the January 6th committee is doing. It's obviously what is happening in New York in terms of the civil and criminal cases against this company. It's the case in Georgia where you had Brian Kemp, fresh off his victory, re-election victory as the Republican governor of Georgia, testifying before the grand jury there. And perhaps the most immediate threat, the documents case, the classified documents case, the documents that he took with him from the White House. And I tell you, I spoke just last night with somebody very close to Donald Trump who said point blank that a big part of his thinking here, and maybe the decisive factor, is believing that an indictment is coming, and he'll be in a better position to fight that if he is a presidential candidate and he can portray it as just a political persecution. So that is very much on the mind of Donald Trump and the people around him.
And that, of course, Frank Figliuzzi, is what endangers. I mean, there is an historic threat environment around DOJ and around the FBI, frankly, around the IRS, because of Donald Trump's response to being under criminal scrutiny by DOJ for leaving the White House with classified documents, not giving them back, and then lying about giving them back. What do you make of his calculations that are, as Jon Karl just reported, firmly rooted in avoiding criminal accountability?
Yeah, and that is why it's for these very reasons, security, motivation, threat, that we should be watching carefully tonight. I know so many viewers say, look, I don't want to hear another word from this guy. But for those of us who track threats, it's important to, as Jon Karl said, not only listen to what he says and how he says it, but the Republican reaction to it. Because if tonight he spends considerable time inciting more violence, more anti-institution talk against the FBI, the DOJ, plays that victim, the more those agencies have to be concerned about violence to them and those around them and in the nation. So we have to ask ourselves after tonight, watching his words and the Republican leadership reaction to those words, whether we're watching a kind of de-radicalization process occur. And I say that, Nicole, because we've talked about how the best kind of de-radicalization occurs from within the radicalized group.
Right.
If they offer the radicalized an alternative, are we seeing an alternative being offered? And if we hear Trump tonight call out by name GOP leaders who have criticized him, and he attacks them, then we're saying two things probably. One is, well, they're fighting amongst themselves. But more importantly, you're seeing a clear alternative being offered. Republicans who get it after the midterms and maybe are going to turn towards sanity, and those who don't. And for those who don't, this gets very troubling because when I look back at our international terrorism strategies and I see what we did successfully against al-Qaeda and take the head off the leadership, and we see a decentralization that is both good and bad, because as the fringe becomes more fringe tonight, and those who side with Donald Trump tonight, and extremism, it gets harder for the FBI and the intelligence community to track a lone wolf operation, someone who's sitting at home tonight listening to whatever happens and says, I'm with that guy. That guy's harder to track because he is that lone operator. It's no longer a whole group, a whole party. So I'll be watching closely tonight for his words and the words of those who respond to him.